Welcome from the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin for our third day of the Martin Roth Symposium 2020. Little would be possible without partners, so thanks to the organizing partners, IFA, the Institut für Auslandsbeziehungen, in cooperation with Republika, kindly supported by Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin and funded by Germany's Federal Foreign Office, for the Martin Roth Symposium within a digital theme week from 7th to 11th September 2020. The Martin Roth Symposium aims to bring together thought leaders from the cultural, the academic, the artistic and the political sectors to share their ideas and future scenarios. And today we're discussing about museum and entertainment, as the discourses of museums today cannot be without considerations about participation and involvement of the audience. So, how can the social space of the institution and the exhibition spaces of the museums be filled with life? Is it more about enjoyment, what museums must offer to the public, or are we afraid to put popular entertainment on museums' programs? Should we just leave it to the entertainment industry? These are some of our questions for today. Let's unpack these ideas and alternatives to these and other questions. And I'm sure it will challenge our traditional views of reality, the role of institutions versus open spaces, and finally the debate how to merge art, science and entertainment. We start again with sprints. And these are 10-minute inputs where speakers present their thoughts on our today's topic, museums and entertainment. Robin Reardon is with us. She's the portfolio executive producer at Walt Disney Imagineering. Also, Tim Reeve, Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Victoria and Albert Museum. With us today is also Marie-Cécile Sinzu, President of the Foundation Sinzu in Benin, West Africa. And Pi Li, Senior Curator of M+ Hong Kong. And Raphael Moku-Schiller, Creative Director and Co-founder of Noise Spaces. Following each speaker, we will have a deep dive, and here you, the participants, can meet many of our speakers for Q&As after their sessions. As we are all in the virtual space, it'll be a 15-minute live online exchange in a digital discussion room. And in case you need further information, don't hesitate. Click on the button Dabei sein, take part on the website campus.republika.com. Before opening for questions or comments by you, some first responders present their thoughts on the spirit. It's a quick kickoff for the following lively discussion. And our first responder of today is Manoucher Shamsrizi, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann von Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin. And at the end of our third symposium day, we close with the Future Forward session, a conversation between a forward-thinking professional and a student responder. So we will look into today's topic from their perspectives and from their backgrounds. I'm ready. Are you? Let's get started and listen to the sprints together.
Good afternoon from New York. My name is Robin Reardon, and I'm the executive portfolio producer at Walt Disney Imagineering. My job is to lead the creative development team in the creation of experiences and attractions. Walt Disney Imagineering is the creative engine that designs and builds all Disney theme parks, resorts, attractions, and cruise ships worldwide. I'm excited to join today in the discussion on museums and entertainment. In 2007, the ICOM defined museums as a nonprofit permanent institution in the service of society and its development, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. That's a lot of words. While I know this definition is ever evolving, it's a good place to start to identify the areas of intersection between entertainment and museums. Two words in that previous definition will be the focus of what I want to talk about today: communicate and enjoyment. Because if you succeed in those two things, education and perhaps action will follow. Communicating ideas and concepts, real or fantastic, is what Disney does. We create places designed to promote and encourage shared experiences through innovative storytelling and immersive placemaking. We like to say we create memories. Sometimes our goal is to make fantasy real, and sometimes, as at Epcot Center, the goal is to make reality fantastic. The initial concept for Epcot was first communicated in 1966. It was an experimental, prototypical community of tomorrow, a living, working city where people would live and work with the joint focus of solving the issues of cities. Walt Disney felt strongly that the solution of the world's problems were not locked in a single location, branch of government, sector of industry, but rather in all of those places in the minds and creativity of individuals. What was needed was a place, an ignition, a shared experience that would spark those ideas and motivate society to action. To do that, those ideas needed to be communicated to a world in a way that was compelling and relevant. The notion of the working city evolved into more of a permanent World Expo, and in 1982, Epcot opened as the second major theme park at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. While Epcot itself is not a working city, many of the progressive ideas and technology strategies were incorporated in the Walt Disney World Resort, including solar power, innovative waste management systems, electric vehicles, and a monorail transportation system. But the basis of Epcot remained to tell real-world stories that inform, entertain, and inspire. A place that, according to Walt, would always be in a state of becoming. At Epcot, we believe the spirit of optimism and hope inspires the world, that anything is possible through human ingenuity and imagination, and that life is better when we engage with and celebrate each other in the world. The industry reported that Epcot saw over 12 million visitors in 2019. 12 million international visitors introduced to the stories at Epcot. How well we did our jobs as designers, as cast members, as storytellers, determined the level of engagement, the intensity of memory of those 12 million visitors. A story well told can be the difference between memory and obscurity, between engagement and disinterest, between passivity and action. In a theme park, a story is told through words, characters, music, placemaking. It may be enhanced with visual effects and the interaction of the cast members. Cast members is a term that Disney uses for all of our frontline employees who interact with guests and help tell that story. Whether the story is about history, science, the future, or a particular Norwegian-inspired ice princess, the intended result is a shared experience, a memory, a story that then gets retold. Every story, every planned guest experience at Imagineering starts with the clear design principle. These principles become the basis of design decisions. They unite the team, they unite the process, they become the center of every story. Epcot was conceived on Walt's sense of optimism for the future, a belief in the possibilities of human creativity and innovation. That becomes the basis of our design principles. Through the years, as we've added new experiences or adapted existing ones, those principles have been refined, restated, and updated to ensure that the future teams stay true to the authentic and original vision while still embracing and adapting to new audiences, new technologies, and new stories of the future. Think of the design principles as a checklist. Is the story that we're telling about real worlds made fantastic? Does it connect the audience? Can they see themselves in the story? Does it spark curiosity, exploration, and discovery? Does it connect as humans to a shared story? Those design principles are different for our other parks. At the Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World's first theme park, fantasy reigns. This is the home of princesses and pirates and talking animals and space adventures. In the Magic Kingdom, we're encouraging the suspension of disbelief. We encourage guests to forget reality and believe for a minute that they can fly, that they're a pirate, that they can visit a faraway planet. At Epcot, we use the same storytelling tools, but we strive to not to suspend disbelief, but to inspire engagement, discovery, and imagination. We inspire guests to be an astronaut, to be an inventor, not to be the object of someone else's story, but the creator of their own. If you're swept up in the thrill of how a story is told, the story itself becomes more engaging, more memorable. So as an example, shortly after Epcot opened in 1986, the Living Seas Pavilion opened. It was, at the time, the world's largest indoor saltwater aquarium, which was pretty cool. But as a tourist, looking at the diversity of sea life in a really big fish tank is cool. But what if, instead of just viewing, I'm an oceanographic researcher at the bottom of the ocean studying marine life. So we invented the hydrolator, which was a simulated elevator experience that took guests to the bottom of the ocean. And in so doing, we transformed passive observers into active explorers. And then we added a scuba diver that swam through, which added even more reality to what you were viewing. More thrilling than any fantasy ocean adventure. Reality made fantastic, inspiring young visitors to explore. A simple change of POV can create lasting impressions, connection, and a deeper engagement. We as designers have to constantly police ourselves to see our world and our work through the guest point of view, whether it is a new experience, a new exhibit, or the revision or updating of an existing exhibition. We have to be aware of subtle detractors that unintentionally exclude our guests from and keep them from engaging in the story. The choice of a narrator, the use of technology that might be superfluous to the story, language or images that might exclude or at some level communicate, this isn't for me, this doesn't include you. All of that can limit engagement, and therefore the number of voices, the number of people that will participate in that discussion, in that experience. To engage an audience, we must be clear on who the audience is. We must write a story in words that resonate. We must use tools and technology that is appropriate to that content. And we must consistently revisit those choices as the audience, the context, and the story itself evolves. Whether we were asking our audience to experience a planet in a galaxy far, far away, or the artifacts of a civilization from centuries ago, we must invite them in, ignite their curiosity, spark their imagination, tell them a compelling story. We must at some level entertain. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to our deep dive discussion.
Hello everyone, and let me start by saying how pleased and indeed relieved I am to be able to join you for the second Martin Roth Symposium, and may I say a thank you in particular to the organising committee for inviting me to participate. I'm also delighted to be joining you from my office at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, reopened to the public a couple of weeks ago after 138 days of closure, the longest period of closure since the Second World War. A glimmer of light at the end of a very long and dark tunnel, an experience I know shared by colleagues across the world, and giving us the opportunity for the first time in several months both to reflect and to imagine and shape a new future in a social, political and economic context that has of course changed beyond all recognition. The context for any discussion about the role of museums in the middle of the 21st century, the role of any public institution come to that, has also been transformed. Discussions and debates that were in the tentative early stages before lockdown are now being accelerated. Calls for change to institutional strategy, values and culture have become more impassioned. And I welcome that new sense of urgency and impatience, whilst at the same time, of course, wishing desperately that the events that have led to this new sense of urgency and ambition had not taken place. Only last year, ICOM, the International Forum for Museums, made a protracted and ultimately unsuccessful attempt to design a new definition for museums, which suggested that once again there is a perceived contradiction between museums as places of scholarship and debate, for learning, for the safeguarding and conserving of humankind's creative and cultural legacy, and their responsibility to connect more powerfully with contemporary society, with its many and complex challenges, to innovate and find new modes of engagement. Now it is clear that museums must develop an ambitious and sustainable response to the challenges thrown down by the Black Lives Matter movement following the gratuitous and horrific murder of George Floyd in Minnesota, in a world where nearly 1 million people have lost their lives to coronavirus, and with the economic impact and uncertainty that now lies ahead for so many across the world in the months and years to come. And if that were not enough, those of us who call the UK home have the added complexity and confusion of Brexit to look forward to. So in this new reality, what is the future for museums as places of entertainment, which can lift our spirits, make us smile and indulge in some escapism, to have some fun, at the same time as embracing the complex challenges and opportunities from the last few months? It can be daunting, and I remind myself constantly of the British historian David Olusoga's recent quote, "There is a tendency within Britain to see history as a place you go for recreation, to feel good about yourself, and that this cannot any longer prevent the telling of history, warts and all, honest and transparent." Museums have some challenges to respond to for sure, around equality and diversity of opportunity in their ranks and at board level, around decolonisation and restitution, and around the very survival of their operating model and financial sustainability. But they also have a role to play in shaping and inspiring a future of possibility and opportunity. A museum at the top of its game, even now in 2020, should provide experiences which are just that, experiences, which are joyful, fun, uplifting, optimistic, emotional, and responsive to the world as it changes around us. We are not businesses, but we should be business-like. We are not part of the entertainment industry, but it is okay, I think, to say that we are in the happiness business, looking to entertain as well as to inform, to be places for serious debate about the future of our society, but places for escapism, for leisure, for recharging. Many cultural organisations in the UK and elsewhere are trying to navigate a path through what at first glance appear to be competing priorities and demands. As I speak, the heated public debate in UK cultural circles, primarily taking place through Twitter, surrounds a leaked draft 10-year plan developed by the National Trust, a charity as custodians of 300 country houses and estates and huge swathes of countryside, which tries to make sense of this new reality, reducing costs to reflect depressed visitor demand, and at the same time looking to equalise their visitor experience for a more diverse audience, and using their country house inheritance in particular to create a more balanced narrative, not least where it involves the lives of their original inhabitants. The criticism of what at first glance seems to be perfectly balanced and responsible discussion document, and certainly at least well-intended, has been somewhat predictable, with its opponents deploying, in my view, some well-worn and tired cliches. This quote is fairly typical from a well-known cultural commentator and designer whose blushes I will spare. Quote, "The country house is Britain's greatest contribution to the history of art. It is one of our great treasures. The National Trust has sworn to protect the country house, and now it is trying to neglect it. They, the National Trust, are trying to turn themselves from an antiquarian body into a group which is in the business of entertainment. In the entertainment industry, all that counts is getting visitor numbers up, so that's what they do. They'll put in go-kart tracks and bouncy castles given half the chance. It's so cretinous." This is the old Disneyfication line of attack that implies there is no space between populist entertainments, theme parks, football, the cinema, and high art and scholarship. No room for programming and experiences that entertain as well as educate, that inspire as well as inform. For critics of moves away from the status quo, it has to be one or the other. And if you are doing both, you are either dumbing down or you are super serving the cognoscenti, the educated elite, the culturally empowered. This thinking cannot be allowed to re-emerge, certainly not at institutions like the V&A, with its audience reach and its physical resources. 4 million visitors a year, 100,000 members, 2.5 million objects, and 7 miles of public galleries. We have the space and experience to serve and reflect different interests, perspectives, preferences, and modes of consumption in what is, after all, for most people, their leisure time, without spreading ourselves too thinly and compromising our commitment to excellence. Museums operate as part of the experience economy and have a serious track record in delivering programming which is memorable, emotional, and crucially, Instagrammable and TikTokable. Audience feedback and research clearly show that museums need not be pressured into choosing between artificial conflicts as they adjust to the demands and challenges of the moment. Very few of the nearly 1.5 million people who visited the V&A to see exhibitions on Christian Dior, David Bowie, or Alexander McQueen, or who attended the seminal takeover of the V&A by Galden, an organisation established to support women of colour in their creativity, would say that they were not entertained as well as informed and educated. These are performances and events, after all, or a happening, as one visitor memorably described the Savage Beauty exhibition. Nor is there any evidence to suggest that those who visited other parts of the museum felt that we had diluted the museum's commitment to scholarship and education in the breadth and depth of our programming. Our museum, and many others like it, was created from the Great Exhibition, like the world's fairs that followed, using design, scale, wonder, and ambition to entertain the population. 6 million people, a third of the UK's population at the time, came to see the exhibition, as well as engaging and inspiring them through art and design excellence from across the world. The building that became the V&A, from the world's first refreshment rooms designed by William Morris, through to the soaring drama of the cast courts, the elegance and light of the medieval and Renaissance galleries, and from the majesty of Aston Webb's Cromwell Road entrance and facades to Amanda Levitte's icy ceramic courtyard on Exhibition Road. This is an institution that has been designed to provide a canvas and a stage for performance, for entertainment and inspiration. Martin Roth's final exhibition as director of the V&A achieved this delicate but powerful balance and overlap between excellence and entertainment. An exhibition on revolution, a story of 1960s rebellion and the shifting of social tectonic plates told through art, design, fashion and performance. Literally next door to an exquisite and forensically researched exhibition on medieval embroidery, Opus Anglicanum. A perfect example of an institution in tune with its audience, connected with issues and agendas in the real world, but rooted in peerless and painstaking research, conservation, and display of objects from across the world that tell a story of human creativity and skill at its apogee. Responding to Black Lives Matter, coronavirus, and Brexit is a serious business, a generational challenge that must be met, but entertainment, the shared visceral and emotional experience, joyfulness and optimism are more important than ever. Thank you for listening.
So, welcome dear participants. It's beautiful to have you with us on the third day of the Martin Roth Symposium about museums and entertainment for this deep dive with Robin Reardon, Portfolio Executive Producer, Walt Disney Imagineering, whose sprint you just saw, and Manusher Shamsrizi, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann von Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt University of Berlin, who will be our first responder for the whole day. My name is Fabian. I will guide you through the deep dive today, and it's a pleasure to have the two of you with us. And also, it's a pleasure that you take the time to answer the audience questions. So thank you both. And
it's great to be here.
For you as participants, this is the time to ask your questions. So let me explain how to participate in the deep dive sessions. If you have a question, there are 3 ways to include them in this discussion. The first one is via direct audio in this webinar. So please click on the raise your hand icon, which you can find in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. As soon as it is your turn, I will call you by name and enable your audio. Please unmute yourself so you can ask your question. As soon as you have asked it, we will turn off your audio again. Your video will never be used. But if you prefer, you can also ask your question in writing in the chat of this webinar, or you use our online form at campus.re-publica.com, campus.re-publica.com. If you're following from a website or through YouTube, we can include those questions as well. So if you have questions already, feel free to send them already and use the tools. So we have little time, and I would like to ask Manusher for a quick reaction to Robin Sprint.
Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you, Robin, for that fantastic input. And just want to second what you all, the audience just heard. This is supposed to be very interactive, which also means the first responder is supposed to be short in what he does in his response and as provocative as possible so that we can enter into a dialogue and discussion. So please bear with me as I'm not going to repeat all the many things and dimensions in Robin's input that I wholeheartedly agree with, which has been a lot. Just to mention one, the distinction between engagement and activity to which it leads on the one side, and disinterest and passivity, that resonated a lot with me. If you look at museums, I believe that this distinction is a very clear and very fundamental learning from the entertainment world, which of course is in all of its varieties, even be it theaters, be it cinemas, be it books, be it games, very good in really making or conceptualizing their approaches built on that understanding of when is something leading into activity and when it's something leading into passivity. And as I see it, and I'm with Robin on that, disinterest is of no value in no scenario I can think of. So that is something to avoid. And there's a learning for the museum world there that they can really make themselves useful from the entertainment world. Having said that, I believe in the end, and that's the provocative part to say so. When Robin was sharing with us Disney's idea of creating memories, that of course can have or there is a critical perspective needed that the museum world can bring into that, because every time memories are created and every time reality in distinction to fantasy, does these two fields impact each other, the question is legitimate: whose memories, whose reality, whose stories are told by whom? And Robin mentioned partly aspects of diversity, but I think in the end the question whose stories should be told and whose reality really should be shown in an engagement positive way, that is something that I personally would not see in the sphere of the entertainment industry alone. To give you an example, I'm very sorry to Robin, but I could not spare you with this. The risk of not having the research and scholarly perspective of the world of museums when it comes to the question what reality is told to the world by whom, no matter the way it is told. I have a very concrete example of why I think there's a risk, and Robin talked to us about pirates, which I personally am a huge fan of, and I have to show it this way so that everybody in the audience can see and get my point. There has been an attempt by Disney to tell the reality of pirates, which resonated a lot with the internet. That's from a TV series by Disney, and one of the dimensions of the pirate's reality that's been told here, just as an example, is that a good pirate never takes another person's property. And of course, in the cultural technique of memes, which is such a powerful tool of storytelling in the age of digital connection, somebody put down a picture from, I'm not quoting, but another very successful entertainment genre, a movie, pointing out that you are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of. So that's just an example, because Robin told us about pirates, and I totally agree that kids should learn about pirates. But if the reality Disney tells as an entertainment industry without having scholarly backup by museums is the reality of pirates that should not never took another person's property, we run into difficulties of alternate realities, to say so, and that we should avoid. And I believe we can easily avoid by collaboration between these two worlds of entertainment and museums.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you very much for your statement already. We already have the first questions coming in through our tools. I would like to ask the first question by Ariane, who asks, what exactly do you mean with the audience's engagement? Like, how does the storytelling lead to action, and which actions would be the goal according to Disney's vision?
That's going to depend on the actual exhibit, or the actual experience. So to the point that the first responder was just making about comparing scholarly reports on pirates, for example, agree with you, but that was the distinction between the Magic Kingdom and in this case Epcot, where we tell real world stories. So in fantasy, where we are suspending disbelief, like every fantasy, we don't believe that there are witches who can, have poison apples and princesses that live up in towers. That's not real. There's no amount of meeting with museum scholars that would make any of that real. So at some point we have an obligation to be very clear on when we're in the range of fantasy and when we're talking about real world things. In terms of audience engagement, at the lowest bar, what I'm referring to is if you draw somebody into the story and if you make that story memorable, then you will remember that experience. So if the first time that you saw a moon rock, or the first time you saw an artifact from centuries before was at a museum, and the way that was presented, and the way that you will remember when you saw that, and that is where the goal of, I think, museum exhibits and entertainment are similar. You want to have that moment where the guest that came into the museum so engaged and so was moved by that content that they remember it, that they absorb it, that they move to action. So there's a museum, I wrote notes here, there's a museum in Ireland called the Cool Planet Experience. It just won this year the Themed Entertainment Association Award for museums. And it was an old estate in Ireland that they wanted to convert to be more energy efficient. And in so doing, they created a guest experience. I haven't been there and was just listening to the case study the other day. A guest experience that drove guests in, that drew guests in by asking them some questions at the beginning about what their carbon footprint was. And then through the exhibit and through different experiences, they saw what the impact of their choices were and how they might have the potential to make further impact. So that particular exhibit, which was real content, which was real data, but was portrayed in using all the latest technology from both, tracking with IFR wristbands, to engaging and providing content and real-time feedback, and then having programs that you could immediately participate in or sign up for, whether it was, a camp on environmental issues, et cetera. So it was that proximity of having the emotional engagement and then the opportunity to turn that into action.
I want to agree with Robin on that.
I would like to give the audience the chance to ask their questions. So sorry to interrupt you this so roughly, but I would like to include those questions as well, because I think there's one question by Harald, which is really also very much fitting to what you just said. Also, where do you see the limits to the freedom in exploring or observing for those active observers you intend to create? So how do you make these limits transparent to the visitor?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you say the question again? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, so where do you see the limits also in participating and in actively participating, or for the active observer that you intend to create? So how do you make these limits transparent to the visitor?
Well, in the theme park world, it's very specific because there are the physical requirements in a space in terms of what you can physically do, whether it's what you can touch, how close you can get. So in the sort of real world physical engagement, that's communicated through the placemaking and the physical design of the exhibit. If the question is more theoretical in terms of setting those expectations, I think that goes into the narrative that I'm not sure if there's no limit to what your participation can be, if what you're really, if it's something so broad as you're trying to inspire people to be moved by art or moved by history, there really isn't a limit into what that participation or how that participation might be manifest in the day-to-day life. Do they start seeking out more experiences? Do they read more? It's happening in Black Lives Matter and in some of the social awakening that's happening. Is people, I think, are moved by what's happening in a way that, historically it sort of comes in waves, but we're at a moment now where I think there's a larger part of the population who is feeling things at a visceral level and is looking for ways to understand that more. And I think that the museum world has a role in explaining both the historical context that gives that dimension, as well as providing historically, at least, boundaries of successful and impactful participation.
I think the one of the most interesting dimensions of Robin's introductory talk, but also what you just said in regard to the question, to both questions actually, is that aspect of experience and something museums can learn from the entertainment world. I would argue is to make that experience not exclusively bounded to the physical reality. I can buy a ticket for a visit to a cinema, a music festival, or whatsoever, and my experience starts before. I was going to point out in regard to your first answer, Robin, I was at a music and art and science festival in the Principality of Liechtenstein, which might not be a leader in the entertainment industry, but this one was fascinating because they asked us, including us speakers, for our date of birth. And when we arrived, then the little name tag that you usually get had the amount of CO2 in our hometown on our day of birth, as well as the numbers of cars in our hometown city. It all was designed the same way, but it was very personalized. And that's the two things making the experience non-correlating necessarily to the physical visit of a building of a museum, as well as by sharing it on social media and so on, and continue the dialogue, as well as personalizing it in a way that has not been possible so far without the digital tools. Entertainment is very good in that, and by doing these two things, personalizing and making the experience a broader continuum that is where the physical visit is only one part of before and after, just as you said. I think that are two very valuable learnings from entertainment and Disney in particular, I guess, for the world of museums in regards to the questions we heard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we already have to come to an end of this very interesting conversation. It's really a short amount of time that we have. I'm sorry we couldn't include all the questions. I'm sure we will get the chance at a later time to ask your questions. Thank you very much, Robin, for your time and for answering the questions. Manusher will stay with us for the next deep dive with Tim Reeve, whose sprint you already heard, and which will begin in just about 1 minute. So thank you again, Robin. and
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of the program, I hope.
Thank you.
So welcome back, dear participants, to the second deep dive for today. We are very happy to welcome Tim Reeve with us, Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of Victoria and Albert Museum. And still with us is Manusher Shamsrizi, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann von Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt University of Berlin. We are very happy to have you with us. Just to remind you, there are 3 ways to include your questions. So the audience questions, that it's your chance to ask your question. So there are 3 ways how we can actually include them. You can participate via direct audio in this webinar by clicking the raise your hand icon. You can also ask the question in writing in the chat of this webinar, or you use our online form at campus.re-publica.com. If you're following from our website or YouTube, there is also the chance to include those questions at campus.re-publica.com. So let's dive in, and I would say, Manusher, you have the floor.
Thank you. And once again, I'm trying to be short and provocative, as we have been asked to start the discussion this way. But I will fail in doing so because I was highly moved by what Tim shared with us. To say so, for example, the connection between the role of the museum in the future as a part of the transformation of public institutions in general. I tend to believe that that is overseen aspect, that the transformations in many, many ways, moral obligations, transparency, accountability, inclusiveness, that now the museums face, that's the same other institutions, not only, but mostly from the public sphere face, which means that there might be unheard neighborhoods and potential collaborations with part of the public administration still seen by many museums, to say so, as an enemy, maybe because that's where the money and the grants come from, but they really might, in the way Tim described it, be partners. Really, I also have been moved by the idea of museums being in the happiness business. Having an original background in political philosophy, my first thought was, is he talking about happiness or is he talking about the business of joy? I'm looking forward to learn more by Tim on this, because of course there is a difference, and in the end he talked about joy as a dimension of the experience in the museum as well. But generally, to maybe point that out, I was reminded of a discussion we have in the world of the cultural techniques of video games for many, many years now, where there's a differentiation between serious gaming, a very European approach. I built an experience that has from the very beginning in its DNA the aim of serving something beyond happiness and fun, and the much more successful approach that is discussed as gaming for impact, which is a broader approach, accepting the fact that something might lead to happiness in the first place, and you still are able to build on build around that happiness a real life serious impact, to say so. I also very much agree with what Tim said, and I'm trying to quote that the critics of the distinction entertainment versus education that are saying if you are doing both, you are serving the educated elite only. That is a very value critic of criticism, because I believe the opposite is true. Just as we heard, why should a more experience-driven approach not enable people who might not be part of the educated cultural elite to come? It might be the opposite. I would argue it's the opposite. And final point, so you see, it's not very provocative in this case, I'm afraid. The idea that museums should connect with issues and agendas of the real world, and do so by building up on research and scholarly work as well, while still serving in the happiness business. I agree with that as well. And I look forward to visit Victoria and Albert next time to learn how that works in the practical implementation.
Well, so there's a lot of agreement, obviously.
I'm
so
sorry.
Maybe, yeah, that's no problem at all. We already have a first question come in by Giovanna, who asks, Tim, how do you see the future of the so-called blockbuster shows in the post-COVID world? Can they coexist with social distancing and time slots? How could you make up for that shortfall in funding at the V&A, for instance?
What a great question. And a question that we have asked ourselves many, many times over the last few months. I mean, I don't like the term blockbuster. I mean, I think even that term sort of implies some sense that it's not sort of substantial, and it's not a kind of a serious kind of exhibition. But there's no doubt that we've been very successful, in part because we have been able to hit this sort of sweet spot between scholarship and entertainment with some of the exhibitions I referred to earlier. And that kind of model, if you like, that business model does require really substantial audiences of 300,000 to 500,000 visitors coming through an exhibition. And right now it is very difficult to imagine how that will ever be possible again. So we will have to adapt. I think it will come back, but it will take years rather than months to come back. And we're looking at a number of ways that we can do things differently to capture our audience. For example, as we've done with our kimono exhibition during lockdown, having a much better digital version of that exhibition, obviously kind of free to access during lockdown, but maybe in due course as our post-COVID landscape looks clearer, working on virtual exhibitions that we feel you could also charge for in the way that you could charge for exhibitions here. But the really important thing for the V&A is to see an exhibition as part of the overall program of the V&A, that somehow, for most people, for lots of people, their access point to the V&A might be through an exhibition, or it might be through a first date with somebody who goes on to be their life partner, or it might be because they're meeting somebody for a business lunch in our members room. But it's just that the coming into the building, the act of coming into the building at whatever touch point might then start a journey which leads to deeper and deeper engagement with the breadth of our collection and the depth of our kind of research. So that's a really big question for us to look at. The only thing I just wanted to kind of use as a prop, just in case I run out of time, is this. This is a trophy that we won, that we're kind of rather proud of at the V&A. This was the Alexander McQueen exhibition, and it was the award for outstanding achievement as presented by the Themed Entertainment Association in Los Angeles. The exhibition judged to represent the highest standards of excellence and achievement associated with the arts and sciences of themed entertainment. So museums can hit this sweet spot, can achieve this kind of balance. The question about how we continue to do that in the future, I think, is an open one at this point.
Well, Manusha, maybe you can share your opinion on how games can actually help with that. Is there a way to bring games into the museum? And
sure, for sure.
Well, that's a long story in itself, but I believe it goes back to our discussion with Robin a few minutes ago. It is also in line with what Tim said. Many aspects of gaming as a cultural technique can, by definition, because it's digital, it's utopian to say so, it's not bounded by physical reality, can help to make the experience not starting with entrance to the building and ending with leaving the building, but it can start to say so with an augmented reality preview once you got the ticket at home. It can continue something the Game Lab is working on with many museums, including the Humboldt Forum, is a gamified dialogue with objects, so you can talk to pieces of art. So many of the cultural techniques of gaming can help in expanding experience. It's less the technology, I would argue. It's more the understanding of interaction that Tim also mentioned. To make it concrete, I'm now not only looking forward to visit V&A at some point, but maybe in the members' room, we can make sure it's not only elder British gentlemen meeting for lunch, but maybe a short but nice esport tournament would be appropriate to introduce a new audience.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we did do a brilliant exhibition on video games and video game culture and video games as a cultural phenomenon, but also as an extraordinary business and means of engaging with kind of Gen Z. I mean, it was a great exhibition to do. It was incredibly successful and is on tour around the world. And I think for most people, their most memorable learning experiences from their formal education are through fun or through play. You know, everyone remembers the teacher that managed to bring a dry subject to life through a different mode of transmission, a different form of kind of teaching. So I think you're kind of right. And with all of these things, it is about achieving a balance, that one doesn't want to go down a particularly kind of narrow path in terms of media, that different subjects for a different audience at a different place and at a different time require different media and different modes of engagement. And as I said in my presentation, you know, we are lucky enough to be a big enough museum in terms of space and collections, not to be all things to all people, but to really explore lots of different ways of doing things. And as you will have heard from Gus Casely-Hayford, our new director of V&A East, with that particular institution, to build a new institution right in the heart of a community for whom the V&A is not part of their lives. It's not a relevant institution, even though we are a public institution and a civic institution. There is a part of London that really hasn't had the opportunity to engage with us at all. So building an institution in their backyard as a much more direct means of engagement, and to build an institution that reflects their hopes and their dreams is also a hugely important part of what we're trying to do in the future.
I don't see any further questions by the audience at the moment. So I would like to bring this deep dive to an end. Thank you very much for taking your time and for bringing in your input. Thank you very much for taking the time, especially to Tim, who is leaving us now and who's going to enjoy the rest of the program, I hope. Thank you to Manusha, who will still be with us for the next deep dive at 6:30 with Marie-Cécile Sinsou, whose sprint will begin just after a short break. So I hope you have fun with the Mars program and see you in the next deep dive.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to speak about museum and entertainment. I've been creating a foundation, a private foundation for contemporary art in Western Africa, in Benin, in 2005. why would I do such a thing? Quite easily, because I was teaching in a class at that time with 40 children wanted to know about art history. And so I started speaking about art history, and very quickly I realized I was speaking about Occidental art history, and that it was time to come to African history and to contemporary art and what was happening today in our country and on our continent. Very quickly I realized there was absolutely no way to show them actual creation. There was no space. There were no space, either in Benin or in Togo or in Senegal. I couldn't find a place where I could show them creation. So I tried to look where I could bring them and to what kind of space I could bring them. And very quickly I realized the most important exhibition with Beninese artists about African contemporary art was in Düsseldorf, in Germany. So obviously having 40 children in Abomey-Calavi next to Cotonou in Benin, it was impossible to bring them to Germany to understand what was happening on their continent. And so it gave me the idea to start a space. So in 2005 we started, and very quickly it was my first experience. I had never tried to create a museum before, and it was everyone brought some ideas, but the first thing I had to face was people telling me, actually, African people don't go to museums. That's why there are no contemporary art museums. And I thought maybe it's the opposite. Maybe people don't go to contemporary art museum because there are none. So we started trying to understand how people would come to us, and we opened our door. And very quickly we realized that people were not coming because they didn't understand what we were there for. They would enter, but then they would go out in a minute. And when we asked them why, they would say, because it's empty. You have no office, you have no people. And we would say, okay, look at the walls. Maybe you'll see something. Maybe you'll see the paintings and the sculpture and installations. And very quickly we realized that people could not really understand who we were, because we were not, their parents didn't go to museums, and they were not going because there are absolutely no museums in the economic capital. So where people live, we were 10 million at that time, and 1.5 million were living in the capital city. But nobody would realize, nobody could go to a museum because there were none. So we started, the first week, some children came, realized that it was quite funny to come to us and see masks from Romuald Dazoumé and pictures that would ring a bell because it were pictures taken in Benin. And so they started to understand that they could have fun at the museum. So we tried to do little games, Q&A, leaflets, very traditional ways of interesting those children. And very quickly, we had a new idea, which was quite different. It's like, if you are at home, you're not expecting anyone to visit you if you don't know anyone. You have to go and introduce yourself. You have to go and tell who you are and why you would make friends with people. So very quickly, we decided we were meant to go out of the museum. So we started exterior exhibitions, which was not very classical. We decided to show the art in the streets, in the most crowded streets where people would come, and try to explain who we were and invite them to come to our museums. So that was the first idea of how do we become an entertaining space, and how do we create relationships with our audience, and how do we reach out to people that would never come to see us. And so it was obviously very impactful on children, and their parents started to come quite quickly. So we decided to make it a fun space. Why would the museum be a boring space where you learn, but it's very traditional? And we decided to try to change the code. When you came to a Basquiat show, we decided to do a treasure hunt. What noise can you find in a Basquiat painting? And so children would run around all over the exhibition trying to find the noise of the painting, and come back and would earn a present or a picture of a Basquiat drawing, something like that. So we tried to change the way people would look at the institution. And very quickly, people came a lot. We had 6.5 million visitors in the last 15 years. So we were really quickly overcrowded. And we realized that after a few years, after 6 or 7 years, we realized social media would be very impactful for our museum, because if we had opened our space in Benin, there was still no space for contemporary art in Togo, in Burkina Faso, at the time in Ghana, there was no space. So we had to work on that, and we thought maybe social media could give us the opportunity to reach out to other African countries and to more people on the continent that would probably be very interested, but the states didn't understand that the funding of culture was absolutely essential in developing countries, as in other countries. And private people would still be a little careful about creating spaces. So we decided that social media would be a way to entertain people, which was kind of a complicated exercise at the beginning, because we were facing entertaining brands who had a lot of money and a lot of communication budgets. So we had to try to find new ways to interest people with local content and cultural content. And it worked quite well. We have a lot of people coming on our Facebook and on our Twitter and our Instagram. So we decided to reach out differently to people and make like WhatsApp was kind of one of the best way to speak with people. So we tried to use companies' ideas on the museum to make it to make people understand who we were and why we were there. And so after a few years, we started thinking it again. In 2006, we were given the opportunity to show works from the Museum of the Quai Branly in France, which were actually Beninese objects, but who had been taken during colonization. And working on this exhibition, we realized that the kings in Dahomey, the name of the former kingdom that is Benin today, the kings of Dahomey had something called annual customs. Annual customs was the big event of the kingdom, where all the population would go to the capital, Abomey, and would celebrate for a few days around the king and all the court. And so we realized that one of the most important things at that time was discovering the royal collections. The king would put all the population in the courtyards of the palace and get all the most important artworks from the palace, walking on women's head, on Amazon's head, around the population and showing the art to everyone. And so we realized that even though we didn't invent the museum in the 18th century, in the 18th and 19th century, we had a tradition of public demonstration of collections. And so today we are facing the fact that Occidental museums have a model, as it has been shown everywhere, proved everywhere. But we are thinking about the future and thinking of how could we bring something else? What is our future? Where are we going? And how do we impact the people that live around us? And so that was one of the most important questions that we asked ourselves after having discovered this tradition of showing art publicly. Can we get inspired by our tradition and redefine the Occidental museum models that we've been using for years? And today is a very important moment, because the question of restitution is on the table. Will European countries restitute the artifacts that have been stolen during colonization to Africa? Today, France has decided to start the move, and Germany is thinking about it too. And so I think that today our role as a museum is to probably stop thinking only North giving humanitarian help to the South, but more like, how do we create a dialogue? We see children who are 8 years old in Benin, and we have children of 8 years old in Germany. Those children don't have to be impacted by the worst parts of our common history. they don't have to be only impacted by slavery and colonization. We have a real question today about how do we see our future together? How do we cooperate? And how can we imagine that we don't feel condemned by our common history, but how do we imagine how museums can help us define a new relationship? And probably the question of entertainment in museum will be key, because children of both continents who will be interested in those museums, who will feel free, will feel in the discussion, probably those children can invent tomorrow's relationships. So I feel really happy to share about all those things with you in the deep dive in a few minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Pili, the senior curator of M+, a visual culture museum in Hong Kong, which will open soon. It's my great honor today to present in Martin Roth Symposium. I'm very happy to talk about this exciting topic about the museum futures, especially the topic in our session, museum and entertainment. When we talk about the museum and entertainment, it's in the background that the museum are facing a series of the challenges since the middle of the 20th century. If I may, can crystallize or simplify these challenges, I would say there are four major challenges. The first challenge is about the whole structure of our knowledge has been changed. I mean, just like we are not only believe there are one single knowledge to understand the world. There are not only single narrative of the history. There are many new knowledge and the change of the daily life, the change of our culture production also change the structure of our knowledge. The second challenge is the whole understanding the concept of the history. I think, as many people say, is the end of the art history, which means there are not only a single narrative of the history. There are many histories related to the region, different identity, and the different cultures. The third change is the production model of the intellectual has been changed. I mean, besides of the school, besides of the museum, there are many new platforms can also produce the knowledge. And the fourth challenge is the whole concept, political concept of new liberalism since the middle of the 1990s. I have to say, this kind of the change, the structure of the knowledge and the change of the art history or the ending of the art history really invoke a more open concept of the museum. It reminds us the traditional elite concept of the museum, of the art history, of the history museum are no longer valid. We have to develop a new museum culture, a new field for museum to match or to really look into the change of knowledge since the 20th century. For M+, as our vision, we are a visual culture museum, focused on those visual culture products since the 20th century till now. So when we use the visual culture to replace the traditional idea of the visual art, that already shows we want to have a more open concept for the culture and history study. Within this concept, we are not only focused on the traditional visual arts, We are also focused on the architecture, design, moving image, as well as the popular culture. And this really make us have the opportunity to really to put this kind of the popular culture and elite art in the same room. We can have the more equalism idea perspective to understand the different products of the human civilization and the human culture. So this really show that with this kind of the first two challenges, the museum really have the open idea to the popular culture, to this culture related to the entertainment. I think that's a big step. I'm very proud to be a part of this kind of change. But when we talk about there are still other changes which can also challenge the museum. The first is like the production model, the model of the production model of the intellectuals also has been changed. Museum and the school no longer monopolize the education and the knowledge dissemination. And their status is challenged by the virus of the culture and the popular culture institutions. They are also challenged by the popular culture, internet, social media, this kind of thing. So there are many ways, there are many approaches, many platforms can offer us the knowledge. And this really forced museum to find a way to be more interesting, to can have the competition with those institutions and the platforms. And on the other hand, I would say the whole political concept, political idea of new liberalism also changed the idea of the museum. The number of the attendance become the key performance index of the museum operation. Museum, while they have to be charity, but they also have to develop their commercial program to give the museum the sustainability. The museum have to develop their marketing program as same as those commercial enterprise. Then we can see there keep expanding museum shops, blockbuster shows, international traveling shows. In the recent museum practices, many exhibitions even need to have a corner for the audience can make a selfie. The museum can also have sometimes invited the museum invited kind of internet celebrities to promote their show. This also reflects the change of the audience psychology when they go to the museum. The audience used to enter the museum with an educated mind, but now it has become a lifestyle to show their tastes. So when the museum faced these changes of the new production model for the intellectual, when they face the challenge of the new liberalism, means museum has to develop the way to be competitive with the entertainment, to make more people feel more joyful in the museum. But I want to emphasize the museum is a place to produce the intellectual. It's a place to interact with our intellectual, not only interact with our sensibility. So this make a museum is different from the Disneyland. As we are now emerge from the post-COVID-19 with the social distancing as a part of the new normality, going to an art museum and to see an art object simply physically becomes a privileged experience. Art museum should be more open-minded to leverage their content on digital platforms such as internet and social media to provide an accessible, joyful, immersive, inclusive, and participatory experience for audience. Yet, we must remember museum is a place with a dignity will bring us aesthetic and intellectual enjoyment. It is not a carnival to pure stimulate our sense as those booming exhibitions in the new shopping mall. So this is my idea, my concept, my opinion of the museum and entertainment. And I'm looking forward to engage in a discussion with you all in my deep dive session.
Hello, my name is Raphael de Courville. I'm stepping in now for Moko Schiller, who cannot be here today. Thanks for having us. Back in 2018, we developed a prototype to explore the possibilities of augmented reality as a medium for museums to guide visitors and tell stories about their collections. We tested our app at the Gemäldegalerie in Berlin during the long night of the museums. The app was not really designed as an entertaining experience itself, but it was something new and it was exciting for a lot of visitors. It had a few memorable moments, like when we allowed visitors to close the panels of a triptych so they could see the paintings on the back that you can't normally see in the gallery. And I remember one man in particular who played with the app a lot longer than everyone else. He was smiling, he was laughing, he was having a lot of fun, obviously. And since I was there with the team making a documentation video about the project, we interviewed this man. And we asked him, okay, well, what did you think about the app? You seem to be enjoying it a lot. And I really I remember what he said distinctly, because his first words were, oh yeah, it's great. It would be great for kids. It would be great for kids. Like, he was enjoying it, but he thought it was for kids. And I might be reaching a little bit here. Maybe he just meant it would be great for kids as well. It would be great for kids too. But I have to say, it's been a recurring theme in our collaboration with museums, and I think it's revealing. It's revealing of a general attitude towards playfulness. And by the way, I prefer saying playfulness rather than entertainment, because I feel like there's a lot of negative connotation attached to the word entertainment. Maybe that's the topic of today. But as far as I know, there's no playfulness industry. So yeah, I think we're good. To me, it felt like this man thought that it was not really okay to have fun in a serious art museum. At least it wasn't okay to have fun in a serious art museum as an adult. And it made me think a lot about our practice as designers and making digital experiences in museums, as we tend to do. We tend to have to challenge institutional resistance against anything entertainment. Having worked closely with curators for the last 3 years, I think I can understand their fear to some extent. I think it's justified even. Curators don't want the fun experience to draw the attention away from the art itself. They want the information to be scientifically accurate and not oversimplified for the sake of dramatization and storytelling. These are legitimate concerns, really. But if the visitors themselves think that a playful mindset doesn't belong in a museum, even when they personally enjoy it, we might have a lot more work cut out for us than we thought. And this is why I believe it is essential to involve curators in every step of the creation process, and why prototyping, on the other hand, and testing with real visitors is an essential part of our work. And German museums, in particular, are in the process of reinventing themselves. Their digitalization of the cultural sector has been receiving a lot of political push and backing financially. There's excitement, but there's also fear. Fear that in the process, we might be losing what makes a museum a museum. Entertainment, incidentally, is probably the #1 boogeyman in that story. technology is a close second. And fortunately, we work with both. So yeah, I think both these things, entertainment, technology, the fears of entertainment, the fear of technology, they point to a fear of being replaced, of becoming obsolete. And I remember a story from another project where we were having a meeting with some curators at another German museum, and one of the leading curators there got in. We had 1 hour with them because they're busy people, and when they got in, before anybody said anything, not even hello, how are you doing, he put his fist on the table and said, "We don't like technology in our museum." And that was the first thing that anybody said, and it was quite the cold shower, I have to say. And we had to work from there and say, okay, so why don't you like technology? What about technology you're afraid of? And we did an exercise that we often do in this case that comes from human-centered design, and it's called hopes and fears. It's very simple. We ask them, okay, what are your hopes for the project? What do you hope to see accomplished there? What are your fears? And I have to say that entertainment often comes up quite high in the fear column. So yeah, we went through that exercise. We tried to understand what they were afraid of, and we showed them some of the ideas that we had. We also showed them some inspiration from other projects. And what was really quite astonishing is that in just that 1 hour, it was like magic, really. I don't think I was even that confident in the method, to be honest, until I saw that 1 hour later, that same curator was just overjoyed and slapping us on the shoulders and saying like, oh yeah, this is amazing. Let's have the characters from the painting running naked around the gallery. And we actually had to calm him down a little bit. Say, yeah, maybe that's not such a great idea, but yeah, we like the enthusiasm. So yeah, I think it's really, really important that we work closely with the curators. And I'm here to say that playfulness is not in competition with the mission of the museum. Neither is new technology, really. Quite the opposite. I think that used carefully and in collaboration with the experts, playful technology can actually augment the museum experience and make it more engaging for audiences of all ages. So yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm really looking forward to the discussion later, and I'll see you there. Thank you.
So welcome back to participants. Welcome again to this deep dive session. So from wherever you're following us, with our sprinter, Marie-Cécile Sinsou, president of the Fondation Sinsou, and Manoucher Shamsrizi, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann von Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt University of Berlin. My name is Fabian, and I will be your host for this deep dive as well. We are very happy that Marie and Manoucher are with us. I would just like to explain how you can participate in this deep dive, so how you can ask your questions, because this is the audience space to ask their questions. If you have a question, there are 3 ways to include them in this discussion. The first one is via direct audio in this webinar. Please click on the raise your hand icon, which you can find in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. As soon as it is your turn, I will call you by name and enable your audio. Please unmute yourself so that you can ask your question. And as soon as you have asked it, we will turn it off again. So your video won't be used. No worries about that. If you prefer, you can also ask your question in the chat of this webinar, or use our online form at campus.re-publica.com, campus.re-publica.com, and we will include those questions as well. I would say let's begin. Manoucher, I would ask you for your statement on Marie's sprint.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. Once again, trying to make this provocative, as this is our aim to have the dialogue turned into a discussion. But before I do so, I want to say that I was very moved by what Marie said, and I believe there was one statement, one mindset behind the project we have just heard about that really has the potential to turn around the whole debate. I know that's big words, but I'm trying to give substance to them. Instead of asking why, what entertainment can do and what the risks are and so on, turning the question around, as Marie did, and asking why would a museum be a boring space in the first place? That is very powerful, and I believe it's the way to go, because you would not be able, I would argue, to come up with a very fundamental and substantial reason to argue that museums need to be a boring place. So that is exactly, I believe, the mindset we need. I was also impressed by the not very easy scalable idea of connecting the work of a museum in such a setting and elsewhere with the rituals and traditions of the society the museum is part of, and of the community the museum is part of, like that annual customs event Marie told us about. That, of course, there are risks, but the potential and the opportunities for a museum and its outreach and its democratization of who joins, who will become, to speak in Marie's terms, the new friends that then will join you at home, or to say so in the museum, outweighed by much the risks of cultural issues when working in this way with your community. So I believe that is a very clever approach, and it's a very valuable approach, keeping in mind that there are risks, like, for example, the royal aspect of such an event that most probably would need to be discussed in this historical circumstances as well. And finally, another very valuable input we heard from Marie, I believe, was the turnaround of the dialogue of North and South. That is something that we, to say so, in the world of tech innovation and of digital transformation, partly have discussed a lot over the last year, because it turns out that many innovations do not happen in the to say so conservative, well saturated world of, for example, Western Europe, but issues like mobile payment have been developed elsewhere and then re-imported to Western Europe. So there are no reasons that this should not also apply to modern democratic inclusive outreach models of running a museum and the collection. So that change of the relationship of North and South is of high value. And again, trying to provocate, but I was too impressed to do so. And I can only suggest that we all stick with the question, why would the museum be a boring space in the first place, instead of only asking why it should be a fun place.
Well, thank you very much for that already interesting insight. I would like to take the first question that came in through our online tool at campus.republica.com. And Harald is asking whether you integrated the ancient tradition of annual customs of the kings of Benin to your work at the museum, where the treasures of the court were put at public display or adapted in some way. So how are your experiences with this?
I'm sorry, because I just heard the beginning of the question and I don't see it written. So you told me, how did I import the...
No problem, I can repeat it. Don't worry.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you integrate the ancient tradition of annual customs of the kings of Benin to your work at the museum, where the treasures of the court were put on public display or adapted in some way? So how were your experiences with that?
Well, so as we discovered those annual customs, well, the most important part of it, I didn't really have time to speak about it, was human sacrifice. So obviously we did not use the annual custom tradition exactly as it was, but we used the idea of the works of art going to see the people and not the people going to the museum to see. So we did a lot of exterior exhibition, like thinking, where do people go on weekends? They go to the football stadium. So we moved our exhibitions during the weekend at the football stadium. Where do you go after work in Cotonou, which is next to the sea? You go to the beach. So we moved some photo exhibition at the beach. So we tried to use this this tradition of going to the works, going to see the people. We tried to modernize it, but we didn't do the full annual custom program, which is kind of more difficult to put in place in the 21st century.
Marie is asking, what should future generations learn, as you use the term of excuse me, where is it? What should future generations learn to develop narratives for a common history, as you mentioned the term of a generation being very much very much framed by the post-colonial discourses, or especially by colonialism?
Well, this is probably one of the most important questions that we are facing in Benin today. How do you get out of this post-colonial relationship with the rest of the world? And I think the first thing you need is really to understand your own history. And that is probably our major problem today. Today, we don't have access to our history and to our culture. Having very few museums that are expensive, that are not in the capital city where people live, but everywhere in the country where there are very, very few inhabitants. How do you connect to the people? How do the people connect to their history? And how do you know your culture? Because I think the reason why you live with your colonial memory is that you only know that, because it's written everywhere. The colonial history is written in every French book. It's in everybody's eyes. Even today, European people look at us with the idea of the colonization. If you don't know your history, you're not very strong, and you must admit the other's history. So that's what we're thinking all the time about, and that's why we've done some historical exhibition. We've worked with the Museum of the Quai Branly, and we've had Beninese collection coming to Benin 12 years ago, and we did exhibitions with private collectors about our history, our heritage, and we've been working a lot on the heritage questions, even though we're a contemporary art museum, but we've still been working on the heritage questions, because I feel children must understand where they come from to understand where they're going.
And Manusher, in your experience, because you was working as a researcher, sort of, is that something that is relevant for you as well, on how to develop new narratives? Because I know that you're doing that in the gamification, and by telling or developing storylines for imaginative futures. So maybe you can answer that.
To pick up on that, no, I cannot answer that, but I can paraphrase the question. That's all, I'm afraid. But to build up on what Marie said, I believe gaming is in a similar situation to contemporary art, maybe because, of course, there are discussions on narratives, and we should not be fooled. All of cultural mediums that are out there transport narratives, and there are competitions of narratives going on, and that doesn't go away by not watching it. So if contemporary art collections do not search for their own position in regards to narratives that we need to tell or understand on how society relates to its history, And if game developers or the gaming ecosystem doesn't do so, that doesn't mean that there aren't narratives that are transported. So I think it's very valuable to and also necessary to have that perspective of what narrative is transported, what narrative is used, because there's always a narrative in any cultural technique, including contemporary art, that might not have the issues of an ethnographical collection, or including games that might think that they are not that in that problematic sphere of transporting a narrative. And to finish, I believe what would be really valuable, and we see that in this this Martin Roth Symposium already, and I would love to see more of that, would be to really have a transdisciplinary and transmedia perspective on this, because maybe the museums and the contemporary art collections and games and book publishers and Disney, which we have heard from earlier today, these are all different mediums, but they face the same challenges. They are now much more political than they used to be. They should have been political before, but now they are finally to some degree, and we might be able to learn from each other because the challenges might be similar. I would, from what I heard from Marie earlier and now in her Q&A, I would totally believe that games are facing similar challenges as cultural techniques than contemporary art collections face, and we might learn from each other how to handle that, and then the to say so ancient ethnographical collections find their own way, and then we can talk with them as well. Yeah, it's interesting to see the similarities of new progressive art forms in relation to these challenges.
I have one more question through our online tool. Andrea is asking, apparently technology is the future for the cultural sector. The main challenge is accessibility and participation for a broader audience. How can we succeed to not leave people behind? For example, older people, how do we tackle the challenge in your museum?
Sorry, the question is for me, or I think?
Yeah, this question is for you.
Sorry. Well, it's one of the challenges we're facing too in Benin, because it's even though the mobile phone is almost everywhere and people are more connected on social media, and we have a lot of issues with people, not only older people. We have the questions of people not speaking the same language. We have 68 different languages in the country. So how do you connect to people who speak a Norse language or a South language but don't speak French, which is the national language, but not everybody speaks French? How do we connect with very young children? How do we connect with people who live in the countryside, quite far away from the city? We have all those questions, and we answer not only by technology. We answer with a bus going to pick up the children and going to the schools and meeting with the schools. We do a lot of work around schools. We do various languages program. We have an app with 17 different language from our region. So we always face the question of how do we get to people, and how do we meet with people who might be excluded. That's the work we do most in the foundation.
Thank you very much for your time. I see no more questions at this point, so I would let this deep dive end right now. Manucher is still with us for the next deep dive. Thank you very much for your time and also for your very interesting sprint, I think. And the next deep dive will be with Pili. It will be the last deep dive for today, and I hope to see you there in about 1 minute. So welcome back, dear participants, and welcome new participants, especially to Mr. P. Lee, who is joining us from Hong Kong. He is SIG Senior Curator of M+, and Manusher Shamsrizi, who is still with us, co-founder of Game Lab Berlin at the Hermann Helmholtz Zentrum für Kulturtechnik at the Humboldt University of Berlin, who is still with us for this deep dive. Again, this is your time to ask questions to our speakers. You can use 3 different ways to do that. You can either use direct audio of this webinar by clicking raise your hand. You can ask the question in writing in the chat of this webinar, or you use our online form at campus.re-publica.com, and we can include those questions as well. I would ask Manu Chair for his short statement on PD's sprint.
Well, thank you. And once again, thanks for having me. I have understood the message on short. I'm trying to do so. And once again, trying to be provocative enough that we can have a discussion after these comments. Let me start by saying that also in this input, which we've heard, many things have been quite impressive. For example, Dr. Pease pointing out that culture is a much broader term than art, and that there are implications of this understanding for organizations like museums, which then would need to include this stakeholders of the cultural context of a museum, and not only the art world, to say so, which might have been the traditional partners and stakeholders. And we also see with M+ how that can look like. I was very interested in what we learned about virtual and online events happening even years before the real opening of the museum itself. That's something I'm not going to get too much into that, but there are museums in Berlin which could benefit from that approach, I would argue. And also the connection of museums and universities, and that knowledge production takes place elsewhere as well and needs to be included. That is all of high relevance. I also liked, because that connects very much to many discussions in this world, the Dr. Pease pointing out of the new normality not letting us lead into a world in which only privilege decides about who can enjoy and learn and intellectually interact with the museum and its partners, but that internet and tools, we know that in the world of gaming as cultural technique as well, can help to get rid of that privilege. Of course, there are new problems. But I was irritated, to be open about that as well, when we heard about the challenges that arise for museums and based on the political concept of neoliberalism, and that the distinction between museums and Disneyland also lies in the way how museums react on that issues. Now that my background originally is in political philosophy, I have to come I have to make this point. I would be very much interested to learn how a museum that's going to open up in 2021 and that builds around this deep understanding of how neoliberalism as a political philosophy impacts the role of a museum, can has a place in today's Hong Kong, because obviously there must be challenges if a museum tries to implement that idea of neoliberalism or any kind of liberalism in a situation where liberalism, so to say, is on the other end of the continuum of what we see in Hong Kong. And it will be very interesting for all of us to see how a museum can stand up to this high and very amazing values and functions Dr. Li P described. Yeah, that should be my first comments on this.
Thank you very much for those comments. It would be great to get an answer on your question on how you actually established the museum in Hong Kong.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think I want to use a very old quote. I think a museum is still a safe place for the non-safe idea. So that's like many people talking about this whole idea. I don't say M plus so far. When's the idea of building the M plus was the 1997 at the very beginning. So by that time, people have a fantasy or imagination that when Hong Kong was handed over to mainland, the cultural identity will also be handed over to China. But as a place being separate from mainland China for almost more than 100 years, by their handing back, there are not been the cultural identity will not naturally be returned back. There must be something new. So this is the basic we want to build the M plus. And also we have this like huge collection of Chinese contemporary art from 1972 to 2012. The main reason for the Swiss collector Uli Zieg want to donate the collection to Hong Kong is that on one hand, the collection can stay within China, but on the other hand, the collection has a proper, will be preserved and exhibited in a proper museum environment with no limitation, because in most of China, maybe many of the work cannot be shown to public, but in Hong Kong, we do can. To answer your question, when we all know the protest since the 2014 and the most recent protest, that's also a big challenge for a newly built museum in Hong Kong. But for us, like we still believe museum is a mutual place. Museum is a platform in which people, on which people can really communicate their idea. So for us, it's very important that we maintain museum as a platform, and we maintain museum as the way to discuss the issue. Even in the last 2 or 3 months, the both side of the protest, I mean the pro China and the protest part, they also have this kind of communication through our digital platforms. So still another program for the hackathon, in which we invite people to play with our collection. But for us, it's like we don't withdraw, we don't do self-censorship, we don't, and so far the critical freedom and the freedom of expression are being guaranteed in the basic law and the charter of the West Kowloon Cultural District, which we are now. But for us, it's very important to be an open mutual platform in this era. And the other thing is very important that the museum should be open, should be a safe place for people to talk about unsafe ideas. Yeah.
We have one question coming in through our chat, and that is, what is the right, by Giovanna, who is asking, what is the right balance between digital and analog elements in a museum experience or exhibition in your view? Ideally, should there always be a combination of both to be totally inclusive to both young and old, digital natives and committed technophobes?
Yeah, I think the first thing, like we just said, the M plus, even before we open the museum will open for next year. And even in the last 5 years, we have a massive, very aggressive strategy on our digital platform. For us, like first of all, digital platform is not on the mirror for the museum program. Digital platform should be a platform can generate the opinion, the ideas, the understanding, also can generate the community, the virtual community for the future museum. So we very aggressively develop our online show, which they are not just like another show online, but we try to do some show only can be online, and that cannot be repeated in the physical space. That's the one thing. And by the museum open, we have many program. Our whole building facade is a LED facade, which we can commission a lot of digital programs. We have the media tag, in which people can viewing this kind of our collection of the moving image, not those artistic film and the documentary, but also the computer game, like all the new technologies. But to answer your question, how we balance the young and old, I just give you like we on one hand we got a very aggressive, very good digital guide tour, but in the meantime, we also can offer people the very traditional, the audio guide. So that's also the way we offer the all kinds of means for people can make their selection.
Also, if I may add to that, I think one very important point we heard earlier is museums and their moral obligation to make sure that there are the least amount possible of privileges when it comes to access to this museum. And of course, digital tools and technology can help a lot to lower privileges. And so the balance should not only be between technophobes. I would not even understand that word, because as Dr. P said, someone who is using an audio guide, would a technophobe not do that? Because the technology as well in the end. But should be between how do I make sure that people can access museums as much as possible, and not everybody, to point that out, is able physically, resource-wise, politically, whatsoever, to physically get to a museum. We should keep that in mind, and that is something we heard earlier a lot, and that's something I found very interesting about M+, that this notion of getting rid of privileges by everything technology and digital transformation offers, that's the obligation of a museum of the future, I would argue.
Yes.
So I have one more question incoming through our online tool, which I would like to include before we come to an end of this discussion, which refers to something that we heard by Tim Reeve, who said he's working on making a museum more TikTokable. So how do you deal with making your museum more TikTokable?
Well, TikTokable. I think TikTokable is quite a sensitive issue now that they are forced to sell to the American enterprise, and it become quite a political issue now. But I think the TikTokable is very important tool for museum to promote that. Just give you one background. We have like 2 major social media WeChat besides of the Facebook and the Instagram, which were totally not allowed in China. One platform is called WeChat. That's like a major, like it kind of it's kind of the communication tool, but also with with many small program can work on that. And the TikTok is also the totally like some tool for the young and the new generation. That like you have like a 20 seconds or 30 seconds to promoting that. So that's also the way for us to promote our program, to promote our show. But as far as we also know that each media or each the digital platform has their shortage, has their limitation. So that's very important for us to be aware that not only worship to the most newer, the newest the platform.
So I would let this deep dive come to an end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
EP. Also, I think we all look forward to the opening of M+ next year.
Yeah.
And also a huge digital applause to Manusher Shamsrizi, the first responder who was with us the whole day, more or less. And the Mars program will continue on the streams and on our website, on YouTube, with the Future Forward panel. I think a great lookout to MuseumFutures by upcoming museum makers. Raphael de Courville will be there, that you already saw in his sprint. And Annalisa Scherfose will be his discussion partner. I hope you have fun with the last panel. And thank you again for participating in this deep dive and for taking the time to answer the question.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Future Forward session in its third edition. My name is Sarah Berg, and I am saying hello tonight, this evening, to forward-thinking professional Raphael de Courville and student responder and outsider I, Annalena Scherfose. So we'll be ending this day talking a bit more about museum and entertainment. And I Yes, it's a little strange, let me say, that entertainment has been put in focus. As we all know, that easiness, relaxation of the mind, and yes, to cut it short, laughter, are just human and therefore self-evident and natural. Smiling eyes, for example, are recognized everywhere. And all of us who've been traveling in far places where we maybe could not speak the language, there we probably used our smiles and friendly eye expression to get in touch, didn't we? So we are discussing all too human needs, is it? So, Raphael de Courville, you are a designer whose work merges interaction design, digital art, and new technologies. You're also active as an educator and media artist. Since 2012, you have been co-organizing Creative Code Berlin, a community that promotes dialogue between art and technology. And you are co-founder of Neu, a Berlin-based design studio focused on beneficial and playful uses of emerging technologies, including virtual and augmented reality. So, Raphael, maybe could you say at the beginning, or to start with, to which of today's sayings or keywords you could relate the easiest way? Was it like Robin telling us, communicate and enjoy, and education and perhaps reaction will follow? Or was it Tim who mentioned or pointed out we are in the experience economy, so our work should also be, and we just heard it in the last deep dive, our work should be emotional, memorable, TikTokable, and also be to be put and understand on Instagram? Or was it maybe Marie-Cécile who said, and I think it was beautifully put, we were asking our visitors, what noise can you find in a Basquiat drawing? Could you tell how much can you relate to each of those sayings?
Well, that's a lot.
Or what else?
I would say all of it, but yeah, I was listening to the talks, and I perceived that there's a common thread in all of them, which was a certain ambivalence to the notion of entertainment. Sometimes a defiance to the common assumption, and saying like, yes, we should be also in the experience economy. Yes, we should also. What the museum doesn't have to be boring, yeah, there's a common fear or ambiguity in the relationship between museums and entertainment that, as a designer, I get to perceive or feel or sometimes really gets expressed by the kind of people we work with very, very clearly. And that's what I was talking about just earlier. I think it's really interesting as a designer to work in this very in the middle of this tension, and to try to pick apart the hopes that sometimes exaggerated hopes put in the ability of entertainment to accomplish the kind of goals that you have for your museum. Like Mr. Peely was talking about now you really want to augment the number of visitors as your main key performance indicator, which is also a word or a term that's borrowed from a very business environment. And this sort of desire to emulate businesses, but at the same time a fear to become like one or become like a theme park. And that's a really to me that's the very interesting core of this issue, is how do you bring back all of these hopes and all of these fears into something that actually is realistic and that addresses the needs of the visitors? Because ultimately that's what you want to do. Even if your main performance indicator is the number of visitors, it correlates quite strongly to how positively the visitors experience your museum, and that should be your target, really. But that's a bit harder to measure, obviously.
Mm-hmm. So greetings to you, Anneliese Scherfose, as well. Hi there, beautiful that you're with us. Anneliese is a project manager, writer and curator living and working in Berlin and Frankfurt. She's currently finishing her MA in curatorial studies in Städelschule and Goethe University in Frankfurt. And she's part of the selection committee and curatorial team for the exhibition monitoring as part of the Kassel Documentary Film and Video Festival since 2019. Since 2017 already, she is program manager of the artist mentoring program BPA Berlin Program for Artists. So hello to you, Anneliese.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I mean, the talks have been circling around technologies and techniques. So maybe, and Raphael already mentioned it, why do you think that there's such a fear, or why do we lose curiosity once techniques get in?
Yeah, what was interesting to me is the example we talked, or the examples that have been mentioned in the sprints, oftentimes, which were considered to be entertainment, were actually often a tool for education used at the museum, and only because it was technology that was in place here, there was this fear of it being entertainment and taking away from the educational aspect of the museum that was there originally. And I think the reason might be that this technology is considered to be from the entertainment sector. And even though it is used for educational purposes, there is still, this implication to it. But I guess that is really just the medium, and the main question is what's transported with it, and not the canvas that's used to draw onto. So I think it really is because it is from that sphere of entertainment industry, or it could be.
So maybe right away from your disciplines, could you just take us to a museum or an inspiring gallery of your choice and enter it with us, if you just imagine, you enter a space, you get into the foyer, there is the admission staff. What do you see from your discipline? What are aspects and fields of your research? Could you just tell us a little bit and take us to that journey? How do you enter and see and feel and experience museum buildings or gallery rooms?
If I think of a really utopic museum, and following the current discourse of a museum being a democratic place, a space, a polyphonic space, it would be, I can't describe it in detail, but I will try to keep it very broad. It would be something that it starts with really the architecture, being something accessible. And I think the moment where P. Lee was criticizing exhibitions happening in shopping malls, that I have also seen a few in Shanghai, I would actually say, of course, it depends on the exhibition, but in general, if you think of the accessibility of such a place, compared to museums that have ginormous entrances where you have to climb quite a lot of stairs to get in, open ginormous doors, that would be a place where that accessibility is easier. And to go back to my idea of a museum, it really is about creating a space for interaction, making it possible. That was also an aspect Manu Scher talked about, making something personalized, something you can personally relate to, that makes it possible to connect it to your own story in a way. But I think Raphael can probably also add to that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the architecture. Yeah, we've been working with several museums that have very intense architectural identities. We worked with the Futurium and with the Kulturforum, that both have this very strong, in one case, like almost original brutalist architecture. In the other one, I don't know if I'm not an architect, I don't know if it qualifies as neo-brutalist, but it has this very strong black marble, very beautiful, but also quite intimidating quality to it. And we were working on an installation that was mainly targeted at kids or younger audiences, let's say. And we did a workshop with kids in this space before anything was installed there, really. And so it was this big, empty, temple-like space with gigantic, like really high ceilings and black walls. And the kids were getting very quiet and very silent and very shy. And how can you, with your work as a designer, creating an installation, counteract this? Or ideally you want to play with the architecture, but it was quite challenging. And so we had to come up with something extremely colorful and very bold to change the perception of the space. And that's another form of augmentation as well. Ideally, you'd be involved early on in the process so that you work with the architecture and in collaboration with it. But very often we don't have this luxury, and we come in at a time when there is an existing architecture, either because it's historical or because it's just there, and you came in a bit too late to have any say in the way that the exhibition is designed. Especially when it comes to augmented reality, which often is conceived as a way to counteract some failings of the existing exhibition design that cannot be changed. From some people, at least that's part of the conversations that we often have. And I thought that something that Robin Reardon was saying was really interesting in the way that they they do space making or place making as part of the storytelling. And that sounds amazing, but very often in a museum, we don't have this luxury, and we can rely on characters, we can rely on storytelling, sound, visuals and words, but we cannot change the space. And that might be a crucial difference with a theme park. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from the entertainment industry, for sure. If we can try not to be afraid of it, of the word itself, and sometimes we try to bring it through the back door, through some examples and discussions with the curators, to show them the aspects of it that might be interesting for their purpose. But we have to be very careful about it, because it's a hot topic. It's a big red button that's always in the middle of the room.
I mean, we talk so much about the bringing in the audience and talking about those who organize the space. But how about your experience with artists, Annalisa? To what extent do they agree to be presented in an entertaining way? What would you say?
I think that really depends a lot on the practice. There are some artists who already implement augmented reality and aspects of gamification in their work. And in that context, I think it's interesting because it is never a question whether this work is serious or whether that tech is taking away from the seriousness of it. What really makes the difference is if you add that element to a work that is also from another century, and you add that onto it. And I think this is exactly where this fear kicks in, because that usually wasn't an element used to transport knowledge. And once you change that, you are not the one writing the wall text anymore. as to speak. It is the person designing the augmented reality experience. And of course, that is threatening for a museum person.
Yeah, that's a reason why we tend to work very closely with the curators, and there's a lot of fact checking happening. It's always part of the planning that we have times. Anytime we touch content, we need to have a week or two actually to make sure that there's time for the curators to have a look and check that it's either scientifically accurate or just that it respects their vision. And one thing that I want to say about this fear of replacing the experience, the direct experience of the artwork, which is present, especially when we talk about augmented reality, because you have a literal screen between you and the artwork sometimes. I always like to say that the ideal experience is that you have sort of this gesture, like you look at the screen, then you look at the artwork, then you look at the screen, then you look at the artwork again. And that's where you see something you didn't see in the first place. And we had this in several cases with the artworks in the Gemäldegalerie, because that's there can be an augmentation that reveals something that you didn't see the first time you looked at the painting, and now you see it, like something was painted over, or there is this just faintly perceptible change in the painting that you could see through the X-ray image that we overlay on the painting. And now you see, oh, this painting by Hans Holbein the Younger had a different kind of way to face, or the shells were oriented slightly differently, and why did the painter change this? And you can sort of still see it, but you would have never seen it if you didn't have the augmentation to sort of hint at it. And that's really something that I saw actually from a younger visitor at the Gemäldegalerie when we did the test with visitors, and that really showed me that this worked, was that they did the experience, this kid, and so that, oh yeah, there were characters originally in that painting of a city, and they were painted over because either they were not original to the painting, or maybe the tastes changed at some point. We don't really know. The curators, art historians don't exactly know why these characters were there, and they're not. And so the kid saw that and was fascinated by it, could now see it in the painting, and ran to fetch their sister and said, like, look, I've seen this, and pointed not at the screen, but they pointed at the painting to show them, oh, look, there were characters here and here and here. And to me, that's the metric. It's like, how can you create a new way to look at the paintings that might be closer to the way that the curators themselves look at the painting, because the curators are not always available to give you this walkthrough, but the technology might be, and it shouldn't be at the center of the experience, but it's an enabler that brings you a little bit closer to the experience you might have being guided by a very knowledgeable and very interesting person through the museum.
I find it really interesting because you mentioned that many interactions with the people using the augmented reality you developed. And I think, and you also mentioned earlier that prototyping and testing is essential for your work. And compared to other methods of education, let's call them the classical methods, I feel this is something that is not used that often, that you really in-depth watch visitors, how they interact, for example, with the wall text, that you have feedback loops with them and see how they react to the different options they have available. And I think that is really something that makes that experience so special, that that there is this kind of, let's call it, control mechanism that checks how visitors react to it and whether this really works in the way it's intended.
Yeah, you can do these studies in a qualitative, quantitative way. We haven't done so much quantitative research, though a little bit, but we typically try to have a feedback form when we do an installation. We did that at the Naturkundemuseum, in the bird gallery. And yeah, we really like to do this because it's a great way to see what works and what doesn't. And yeah, a lot of feedback that says, "Oh, it would be great for kids," but yeah, people enjoy it, and that's why we try to do it. But yeah, you get surprised by the kind of feedback you get, and that's when you know that something might be interesting to change. Like, for example, sometimes you try things that don't work. We tried wayfinding through sound, and that was an accessibility issue, actually. It sounded great for us. You could pinpoint the sound in a certain area using binaural audio or spatial audio. Great tech, amazing, immersive, but some people just don't hear very well from one ear, and that breaks the thing completely. And in the group that we had testing the app within the museum, I think like half of the people had hearing loss and just couldn't use the wayfinding. So we just added a map again, and that's just something you can find through testing. No matter how excited you are about a feature, if it doesn't work with real visitors, then you have to lose it.
Do you, I mean, by mentioning kids and youngsters, do you actually draw a line between developing tools and materials for youngsters and adults? Or is it what is working for kids is basically good for anyone?
I really think it is. I really wish it was more the case, but we had this experience with the Futurium installation, which unfortunately I wasn't physically present to see, but was told to me by some friends who work there that they had an early showing of the lab to some diplomats, I think a group of French diplomats, and the serious kind with a suit. And apparently, walking around, like, oh, interesting, very nice. And then they got to our installation with this big, bold, colorful funnels that you really invite you to shout and, bend over and shout in this funnel. And then some interesting things happen on the wall. And yeah, apparently these very serious diplomats were just getting really excited and shouting and not paying attention at all to their public image at that point. And that was really nice to hear, because that means, it's not just for kids. Maybe they wouldn't admit it publicly that they enjoyed it, but they did. And I think if good interaction is good interaction, no matter for whom. And we're all still kids inside, hopefully. So if you design it for the kid and everybody, then you're probably going in a good direction design-wise.
So what would you say in 3 or 5 keywords, how to bring more entertainment and playfulness to our museums? What would your golden 3 advice would be?
Wow. So yeah, playfulness in the museum. Well, as we said before, listen to the visitors, listen to the curators, and only use just as much technology as is really necessary to achieve the goals that you set for yourself. Whether it's the curators wanting to communicate a certain type of information, or the visitors having certain desires or expectations vis-a-vis the museum. This is a balance to find. I think there's a lot of hopes put in technology, maybe some in playfulness or entertainment. Very often we hear, oh, it has to be playful, but not too playful. It has to be fun, but it shouldn't be a game. And so we walk on eggshells very often, but we also try to be provocative. So yeah, trying to shake people a little bit out of their comfort zone can be useful, but not be too confrontational. And try to inject playfulness in the process, I would say, is very important. That's something that we tend to try to do, like having a ceremony in the middle of the forest with some curators from the state museums was a memorable moment, I would say, as part of the process. We did that. And you have to be playful yourself. You can't just be very seriously talking about being playful. You have to embody this in your method, in your design approach, and that's what we always try to do. It's hard to be perceived seriously all the time when you do that, but it's important to try it every step. Yes.
Annalena?
Yeah, I would say the entertainment is already there. It really just needs a few tools to enhance it, to unleash it. And I think the most important part of that is really to change the perception of the institution itself. And then it just happens naturally. And yeah, men in suits start screaming around.
So beautiful. Thanks, my big thank you to the two of you. So keep challenging our imagination, please. And yes, to the audience out there, have a cheerful rest of the evening. And I hope that you stay tuned, and we'll be seeing tomorrow again. So all the best. Bye-bye. Auf Wiedersehen. Ciao.
Thank you.
Auf
Bye-bye.
Wiedersehen.
Here, in the east wing of the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, we find one of the most visually striking parts of the exhibition, the wet collections. Previously, this exhibition was unavailable to visitors until the reconstruction to the outer facade of the east wing, which we see today. And today, it's among the entertaining highlights of the museum and gets spread a lot on social media, talking about museums and entertainment. The project was developed by Swiss architects Diener and Diener, also winning the DAM Prize for Architecture in Germany in 2011. Which leads me to our topic of tomorrow, museums and architecture. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for your engagement in the name of the organizing partners: Institut für Auslandsbeziehungen, Republika, Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, and Germany's Federal Foreign Office. I see you tomorrow.